Presbyterian Healthcare Services in Albuquerque is New Mexico's only private, not-for-profit healthcare system and its largest provider of healthcare. Presbyterian has two acute care hospitals in Albuquerque, Presbyterian and Caseman, with 453 licensed beds, 3 emergency rooms, and 9 rural facilities throughout New Mexico. Presbyterian started their First Touch journey in October 2004. Sage Consulting sat down with directors, staff nurses, and First Touch operations leads to hear about their experiences with First Touch. Lynn Haynes, Nursing Director, Cardiac Services, spoke with us about her initial thoughts when Presbyterian was starting.
I don't know. It's interesting when I look back at this because I was a little skeptical at first. It's like, oh, not another thing. We've got so much going on, the units, the staffing, just a lot of initiatives that we need to implement. And in my mind, it's like, okay, what's the action? What's the outcome? How fast will it take? That's how I was thinking about the whole process. I remember going to the meetings, the executive meetings initially, and I noticed going into those meetings, like, okay, we're on a mission, we got to get this done. I'd sit down, and then I would start to relax, and it's like, wow, this is right. It was just the right thing to do. I'd walk out of those meetings thinking, it's not intense, it's just the right thing to do. It's just about caring for people. It's not task-oriented. It's just what we are. But I just recall that initially about going, being very intense, going to the meetings and sitting there and talking. And the more we talked, and we'd go around the room and we'd talk about stories, and pretty soon your whole level just kind of relaxes, and it's just a very good thing. It's a good thing to have. So.
Lori Lineweaver, a staff nurse on the cardiac care unit, had a hard time with the feelings part of being with her patients and their families. Let's hear what she learned as she began her journey with First Touch.
Well, the touchy-feely thing has never been my strong area, and I knew it going into it, and for some reason I keep gravitating towards those areas of nursing that promote that, even though that's not the area I'm most comfortable with. I went into critical care because I like the procedures, I like the skills, I like the science of it, and I like putting it all together, but I didn't really feel comfortable with the feelings part.
Yes.
Critical care nurses have a interesting way of looking at things, that their favorite patient is the orphan on propofol, that no family and can't speak to you, and that's the best patient ever. So it took me, and I won't say I'm completely done, it took me quite a while to develop skills. I don't ever think I was mean, but I just wasn't connected.
Right.
And I just could never quite get it. So when First Touch came, I was on the Shared Governance Council. I was the co-chair of the Shared Governance Council that took it on. And so that kind of led into other things, but it was a very difficult thing for me to really feel comfortable with. It's not that I didn't believe it, it's not that I didn't want it, it just was a hard thing to make work. It was such an uncomfortable place.
Here's a story from Lori about trying the process, giving it her best, and a turning point when practicing First Touch became easier for her.
Well, I tried it. I gave it my best, and some days I gave it more than others, and it would kind of depend on how comfortable I felt with the patient scenario, or how well I connected to the family or the patient, because there are some people you just don't automatically feel comfortable with. So those were easier people for me to do better with. And I had a patient one night, actually early morning. She came out of surgery 2:30 in the morning, which is always a really bad sign, since she had been in since like 6 o'clock the night before. And she had had reactions that they hadn't expected her to have, and she was very, very sick. And she coded probably 3 or 4 times within the first hour, and it was a very intense situation, especially because she was very young. And I finally felt like we had gotten her stabilized, and I sent her husband home because he was absolutely exhausted. and I had to call him right back because it looked like she wasn't going to make it through. And I don't know what it was about him, and I don't know what it was about her, but it took a little bit of extra time with him, even though I really did not have the time. You know, things were very precarious, but I took, I think, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And she lived through the rest of my shift, and she actually lived for like another 6 or 7 days after that. And I was with her the next 2 nights when she was very, very sick, and I was actually with her when she died. But I found out all kinds of things about their first date, and how right before the surgery they got into a big fight, and she kicked him out of the car and left him on the side of the road. And you know, but I just heard all the wonderful memories that he had about her, and she became a person when she was so ill that she didn't look like a person. And in some ways that was very hard to deal with because it's easier when they're not. But I think it was kind of a turning point where it became easier. And I've never heard from him again. I don't know if what I did made a difference to him. I hope he's doing well, but it was just kind of a turning point for me where things started getting easier.
Jane Gulley has been a registered nurse for over 20 years, filling many roles at Presbyterian. In 2006, Jane received the Nurse of the Year award during Presbyterian's Nursing Pride Week ceremonies for her leadership and vision as the operations lead for First Touch. Jane has a passion for First Touch, and you'll hear it as she shares her thoughts with us.
I was so passionate about what we were doing, and I had been visiting with the nurses, and I knew that they needed help. They were too busy. They were not having that relationship with the patients that they wanted, and I knew we needed to do something. I wasn't sure what it was, but when I was approached with First Touch and learned what it was, I knew that this was the right thing. So number one for me was the passion I felt to make a difference with our nurses, who then would make the huge difference with our patients.
Lynn says that satisfaction is key.
Satisfaction is key in the organization, and our cardiac telemetry units are the main drivers for our satisfaction in the heart program. So we talk a lot about that in our unit specifically. It's developing the culture, and what's happening now is it's becoming more of a culture in that it's expected, in that the patients expect it. You know, when there's somebody that doesn't first touch, or somebody that doesn't connect in a certain way, or sit down and spend some time, that's unusual. And in rounding, when we round on our patients, and I don't do it as frequently, but on everyone all the time, the charge nurses primarily round every day. I round on certain people, we got several units, but the comments from patients, I don't know what you're doing to this place, but I was here so long ago and you guys are doing something different. And that is huge. I hear that more often than I ever heard that in the past. It's, what are you doing different? People really care. The care word comes out, you know, and when a nurse does not first touch, it's, you know, we provide very good care. Well, if somebody doesn't do that, it's perceived as not very good care. Yeah. And I think that's huge. And there's many things going on with patient satisfaction. I think this is a key driver. And I keep saying, if we go back to first touching, if we talk about first touching, our hellos, our goodbyes, making that connection, that's what people want.
In this next story, Debbie Miller, a charge nurse in women's care, talks about a first touch concept, the judgments and assumptions we often make about patients and their families. Listen as she tells her story about practicing first touch with a drug-dependent patient.
Another thing that I noticed since I was charge nurse, one of the things that we do here is round on our patients. So whether even if someone else was taking care of the patients, I would go into each room and find out how things were going for the patients on any given day. And I could tell you numerous stories, but one thing that I remember right now that was very touching to me was, so often when you have someone who is labeled as a drug dependent or a drug seeker or that kind of thing. And periodically we would get somebody in that would fall into that category. And it's real easy prior to first touch to label somebody that way and to, as a result of that, care for them in a different way than you would for someone who we would see as being more normal or, you know, more like us. Right. And I remember going into a patient's room one day as I was rounding, and she had had multiple hospital admissions throughout her young life due to her drug dependency. And I was asking her about, you know, how we were doing at providing very good care for her. And she looked at me and she said, I want you to know that this has been a most amazing hospital stay. She said, never in my life have I been treated with the dignity that I have been treated with. And I knew my nurses were doing first touch.
Judy Sanchez, Nursing Director for Post-Surgical Care and Co-operations Lead of First Touch at Presbyterian, expresses what hundreds of nurses, allied healthcare professionals, and designated leaders from Sage Consulting's client partner organizations say about First Touch before they experience the magnitude of the First Touch philosophy, concepts, and process.
I think what I was feeling was what many, perhaps, of our nurses were feeling. Initially, that we believed that we were doing it already. And it's not really about doing every aspect of it, though. I think that I certainly believed when I first learned about First Touch that, well, I already sit down with patients and listen attentively to them and convey that compassion. But when I learned about First Touch, there were aspects that I was not incorporating, and that I realized that many of our staff weren't either. And so as a leader, I really try to incorporate each of those components into what I do every day. Even when I have a brief interaction with a patient, and perhaps it's not an easy interaction that I'm going in to visit with a patient about, but I actually ensure that I have that hello, that I practice a physical touch as well, and that I'm listening very closely to that patient and being present to them and whatever concern that they're sharing with me, and close that interaction with a sincere and genuine concern for whatever they shared with me.
There are nurses who come to First Touch naturally, and then others who might struggle and need to learn new skills.
There are the people that you know are naturally going to be good at it, that already were before. There are the people that really, if they needed any coaching in it at all, would just need to fine-tune the way they do things. And there are the people that are like me, that it was not comfortable, or they never thought of it that way. And I know of one nurse in particular that she's much better. I mean, she's kind of a loud, in-your-face kind of girl, and I like her that way. But I've seen her get gentler and take a little bit more time. And I don't think she tones down what she says, but for some reason it's being received better. And I don't know quite what she's doing, but you know, and I think that it's been a definite change since she got trained.
Lynn Haynes wraps up our video presentation by talking about how the First Touch message and materials are clear and concise. From the Leadership Toolkit to champion and staff materials for workshops, she talks about how every step was made easy for leadership and staff to implement and sustain First Touch.
It was just very nice to have that detail. I think that's why it was successful. The training pamphlets, the First Touch Champion training, or the tools that they used to help teach, it was awesome to have that already lined up, so we didn't have to go. I think that's why it was rolled out so well and consistently, because the constant message came across from everybody, anybody that was involved in training. The same message came across. It was a clear, clean message. It wasn't watered down. It wasn't what we thought it was. You know, everybody perceives things differently, and it was just a really nice direction.